work from the original. All right. I'll call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. First order of business is Senate Bill 348, and the prime sponsor is here, so I'll ask him to introduce himself and to introduce the bill.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Dan Ennis from Bradford, New Hampshire, representing District 7, and I'm here this afternoon to introduce to you Senate Bill 348. This bill makes an appropriation to the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food to distribute emergency relief to farmers. And as most of you know, last year was, well, like every year for New Hampshire farmers, from what I'm learning, was a tough year. There were some weather events that caused significant problems, including a hard freeze in the third week of May, or nearly the third week of May, that pretty much wiped out the peach crops and did significant damage to apples and other crops. Additionally, there was an awful lot of heavy rain, which resulted in flooding and additional losses for some farmers. So this particular bill allocates $8 million to help farms to recover from this. And there are some important guardrails around the bill and where the funding will go. Farm has to have been in operation for at least a year at the time the losses occurred. Well, January 1st, 2022. It actually experienced a loss in gross receipts, so you needed to see a decline in business. Experienced a minimum of 30% of crop loss from one or more of the 2023 events, and had to be a reasonably sized business with $30,000 in revenue. So this authorizes the department to allocate these funds and help our farmers. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, and I suspect there'll be others to follow me.
Just a minute here. I didn't know if I was going to have to lose some more weight before you could get by. Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions,
Sure.
not on the policy, but on the money, because that's
Yes.
where we are.
So where does the amount come from?
Yes,
Right?
that's my first question, is
Yeah.
how did we get to $8 million?
Commissioner Jasper and I talked about this, and he talked me through the damages that he was aware of that had happened in the state and his estimate for what it would take to cover those. That's the source of the number. I'm not sure if the commissioner's here, but that is where it came from.
Could I follow up?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. In what other cases does state government step in to give direct aid to businesses to make them whole?
Well, we did it with the Main Street Relief Project,
Right.
which was a big one. So that's one that immediately comes to mind. But I don't have other examples for you right now. I do know it does happen, but it's not common. And I don't think this is anything we'd want to be common, but I think the losses, particularly from the freeze, were so substantial that it could conceivably put businesses at risk. And farms in this state are kind of, it's difficult. It's a hard scrabble life, and I think, 1 or 2 years of this could wipe out certain farms, and that's one of the last things we want to see. The state's making a lot of efforts to get land, states and communities to put land in conservation, to preserve farms, to preserve the history of farms, and I think this helps those farms to stay in business.
Wonderful. Good.
Follow up? Yep.
The Main Street Relief Program was federal funds, wasn't it?
I believe it was, yes.
Thank you.
That the governor then allocated to, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Senator Del Sandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my apologies for being late. I didn't get to hear all of the full testimony, but I do remember us making an appropriation, this was a number of years ago, to the milk farmers. And that was a fairly significant appropriation. And I think we also made an appropriation when there was the drought and the farmers could not get enough feed for their herds and so forth.
2002 maybe, Senator?
Yeah, well, so we've done a couple of things, a couple of things like this, and My question though is this, the industry, for some reason, has really suffered in terms of they're eliminating the herds. They're getting out of the business.
Yes.
And we had many more herds and many more farms at one time than we do now. And is it your thought process that this will save us in terms of that?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I don't think it will save us, but it will certainly help. And for a farm that's on the edge, this could be a make or break source of funding for them. And you know, as for getting out of the business, that's probably another discussion, but it is very difficult, and certain rules and regulations, both federal and state, can make it tough for small farmers to get to market. And that's probably the bigger issue. But I promise you a bill on that later this session.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rosenbaum?
Yeah. Did you discuss, instead of grants, doing zero interest loans?
We did not.
Okay.
Additional questions? Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for bringing this important bill. And to follow up on what Senator D'Alessandro was talking about, we did do some emergency drought relief funding. I think it was 2018.
Okay.
And we did a dairy relief fund as well, around a similar time, might have been 2019. But the
Okay.
Commissioner can fill in the details on that. But, so it's not uncommon for the state to step in times of disaster like this, when an industry has suffered a loss like this. And so I thank you for bringing the bill forward. It's an important piece of legislation, and I know there's many folks that are behind you are going to talk about the personal impacts on their own family farms as to how it has helped, has harmed them. And so, again, the question I get, you know, you came in with the sum of $8 million. I know in my conversations with the commissioner that that is actually merely a drop in the bucket as to what the state suffered in financial losses. And we have a lot of agricultural entities within our communities all over the state, and it's important that we keep that, you know, rural aspect alive and well in New Hampshire. And this certainly won't save anyone in any of where these funds will go, but it will help to ease some of the burden that many of these hardworking farmers have suffered. And so I guess my question to you is, you know, I know $8 million is a lot of money, but it's an important part to the state. In your conversations with the commissioner and others, have you determined a good source of funding for this money?
No.
Okay, so mostly just unrestricted funds?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I would note that the bill says that, you know, a farmer's only going to get back half of what they lost. So it's not a full restoration, but it does help.
That is certainly true.
Yes.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Commissioner?
Senator D'Alessandro. We are building a herd at my place. We're up to 18, so we got one more coming. Thank you, everyone.
Good afternoon. I was forgetting. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am Sean Jasper, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food. I want to first thank Senator Ernest for bringing this bill forward. We did have a number of discussions about it and back and forth over what the right number is. I think this is a number that helps a great deal, certainly doesn't make anyone whole by any means, and that 50% is only a maximum dependent on how many farms apply and what the amount is. I suspect it will be higher than 16 million when all is said and done, so we probably won't get anywhere near that, and there is a limit per farm. So why agriculture? First of all, most of us eat 3 times a day. We saw during the pandemic that food from out of state could be scarce to come by at times. But this is really the only business type that I can think of that is really 100% dependent on Mother Nature. Now you can say, well, you could have an outdoor sporting event or something like that, but they're not producing something that we all need to live. we have to have food. And it is increasingly important that to people to know where that food is coming from, to have it raised in correct manners, which I think we do a pretty good job in this state. And so it is tough, and we know that climate change is upon us. We're seeing it all over the country. I'm certainly hoping that we don't continue to see the amount of rain that we saw this year. And I just want to, I could show you the picture. I think you all know who Scott Mason is, but he also was a dairy farmer. He sent me a picture of one of his cornfields with, corn about this high and the water about this high. And he said, I can really get used to the bear damage. I just can't get used to the trout damage. And, it was true all over the state that even if people had good hay crops in places, they couldn't get on the fields. It's just a constant problem. And, thankfully, we've had pretty good revenue. So where's the money coming from? Well, I think we're well above 60 million above our estimates at this point. So this isn't a substantial part of it. And I think the question is, what value do we place on agriculture and our few remaining farms? While, the federal government will tell us we have about 4,000 people who farm in the state of New Hampshire, the numbers of people farming full-time and who would be eligible for this probably in the hundreds and probably not even approaching 1,000. We have done this several times before. The most recent one with state funds was when I was commissioner, and I think, not when I was commissioner, when I was speaker, and there may have been some before, but the legislature has placed great value on that. And you're going to hear the stories from people. What I had asked is that there be representatives from each group. I didn't want to have 100 people show up and testify. So you've got the leaders of the commodity groups here behind me. Jeremy Dalal from UNH Cooperative Extension, who has done the survey work, can answer questions on those. I just want to let you know that I am in full support of this bill. The department is ready to administer this bill. We have not asked for any funding in it. We will make it, if you provide us with the funds, we will make sure that without any additional expense, we will get 100% of this money to the farms who are in need of it. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Questions from the senators. Senator Rosenberg.
How did you arrive at the cutoff date of July 30th
Well,
of last year?
I think that actually does need to be amended. Thank you for that. It really should be more like October 1st or November 1st, and I think you'll hear people behind it, because the apple crops certainly weren't known until later. So that date wasn't something that missed my attention, but it does need to be amended. Thank you, Senator.
Senator Ennis, I think you would be the one to take care of that.
I will indeed.
Any additional questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
UNH Extension, we have both Jeremy and Sarah. Do you want to come up together? Or do you want to do it separately? All right. Always interested in keeping the time low, Always interested in keeping the time in mind.
Thank you all.
Introduce yourselves, please.
So my name is Jeremy Delisle.
Hit the button. You gotta have a red light.
My name is Jeremy Delisle. I'm a field specialist with UNH Cooperative Extension on our fruit and vegetable production team.
And my name is Sarah Allen. I'm a state dairy specialist for UNH Cooperative Extension on our food and ag team.
All right, if it's all right with you all, I'll read my testimonial.
If you've already submitted your testimony, then we prefer that you summarize it and not read it, because we all can read it out of the information.
Sure. Okay, well, what I'm here to talk about today is the severe crop loss from weather in 2023. As you all know, there were freeze events in February and May, and then followed by continual rainfall and excess moisture throughout the season. Basically, that resulted in the loss of the total peach crop and nectarine crop in February and significant damage to both apple crops as well as many other fruit crops in the state, including pear, plum, cherry, with losses anywhere ranging from 50% up to 100%. For some growers, this is the first year in 40 years that they've had no apple crop at all. So UNH Extension, in response to these events, we saw a need for quick response. We had the relationships needed to be able to act on the need so that we could better inform our partners at Farm Service Agency, the Department of Agriculture, grower organizations. So we conducted the survey that has been brought up already in this conversation. We did that primarily through online means, sending that out to our grower networks. Basically, that resulted in responses from 70 fruit growers representing about 1,000 acres in the state. And this was done early in the season, and those totals came to about 9.9, almost $10 million in losses for fruit crops from those two freeze events. This was prior to the excess moisture. As the season went along, we continued to see rainfall, excess moisture, even flooding. And so the need became apparent that it was required to have a follow-up survey done for vegetable producers because they weren't necessarily as impacted during the freeze events earlier in the season. The responding growers represented about another 1,000 acres in the state, and they reported just over $3 million in losses as we came into the fall harvest season. Now, it's important to note harvest wasn't completed at that point, so that's an important thing to consider. We don't have those final numbers, but at least $3 million in losses. And that included crops like pumpkins, sweet corn, winter squash, cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, to name a few. And this was confirmed by conversations with UNH Extension specialists calling growers to better understand the situation and make sure that we knew the extent of the damages. So 2023 was the wettest year on record in New Hampshire, according to the National Weather Service. Excess moisture due to frequent rain events, along with heavy downpours, caused erosion and flooding on farms, contributed to multitude of issues for fruit and vegetable crop producers. Just a few of those things from an extension perspective as far as the negative impacts of excess moisture, rainfall, and flooding include poor seed germination, requiring extra succession plantings and additional costs, increased incidence of foliar and root diseases, field accessibility issues, nutrient leaching beyond the root zone, increased cost to replace required fertility, soil compaction and erosion, which are going to be long-standing issues, poor weed control, and due to inaccessibility with equipment. These will also be issues that growers have to face in the years going forward. And lastly, incomplete field operations, including crop residue incorporation or cover cropping. Again, this is going to affect soil tilth and fertility. Just to bring a touch of science into this conversation, a note on fertility in saturated and flooded soils. So what happens in those soils is we have a process called denitrification that basically converts nitrate, the primary form of nitrogen used by plants, into gaseous forms such as nitrous oxide and nitrogen gas. Lost to the atmosphere, they can result in increased leaching, leading to reduced nitrogen availability for crops and decreased growth and yield. So this is something that growers are facing, in addition to just poor crop growth. This is what's happening in those soils as a result of that excess moisture. With that, I'll stop and take questions or hand it over to Sarah.
Well, let's go to Sarah first, and then and Grant, if you tell Senator Fenton that we're behind, so.
Like I said, my name is Sarah Allen. I predominantly work with the dairy farmers across New Hampshire. I just got here about a year ago, so I don't have as much of the history, but this summer was a bit of a welcome to New Hampshire for me. So I worked with a lot of dairy farmers trying to mitigate some of the losses and some of the concerns with quality that we were going to see from the excessive moisture. And part of that was when I got a text message with a cornfield that you couldn't even tell it was corn. It was about 8 feet underwater. And that farmer ended up losing, I believe, about 50 acres of corn. So one of the concerns whenever we see this excess moisture is complete crop loss, for examples of that producer. And whenever we talk about livestock and dairy farmers, these farmers have they're not selling this feed. They see the results in reduced animal production and also in the expense that they're now going to have to pay to source more feed, either find more forage at a much more expensive cost because everybody is short on forage, or through, supplementing with grains, and there's only so far that you can go with that. The challenge with, kind of estimating these numbers is that nutrition on farms affects every aspect of an animal. It's usually about 40 to 50% of the total cost of production. So whenever we see something even higher on a farm that's working with very small margins, it's very hard for those farms to cover that. And it really impacts everything from the animal's reproduction and also how that animal is going to perform for years to come. We talk about, especially in the dairy industry, if an animal, starts off on poor quality feed, that will impact her for the next year at minimum. So this is something that farms are having to deal with and really don't even know what those losses are going to look like. For farms that are selling feed, like selling corn silage or selling hay, those losses were a little bit easier to estimate because they couldn't get the feed out of the ground. But these were some of the conversations I was having with producers across the state throughout the summer and still ongoing. So like Jeremy, I put out a survey to try and just estimate what we thought some of those losses would look like. And we got reports back that covered about 5,000 or just over 5,000 acres of forage and field crops across New Hampshire. We had representation from every county within New Hampshire, some more than others, but every county was represented. And the financial impact was just over $2 million, with farmers estimating that about $1.4 million being lost in revenue from selling feed or reduced animal production, and just under 750,000 estimates from how much they're going to have to purchase an additional feed cost. So yeah, that's kind of.
Questions from the senators? Senator Pearl.
Thank you. This isn't really a question, but for the benefit of the committee, the reports that they're referring to, you have in front of you, and some good light reading when you have nothing to do this evening while it's snowing.
Thank you, Senator. Other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Trevor Hardy, NEVBGA. If you had more, I could keep going.
Well, thank you, Senators, for hearing me today. My name is Trevor Hardy. I'm the 7th generation farmer of the Hardy family in Brookdale Fruit Farm down in Hollis, New Hampshire. I'm also the current president of the New England Vegetable and Berry Growers Association. For those of you that don't know, that's the oldest growers association in the country. So it started here in New England, represents all of the New England states within the region. I'm here to you to talk today about this bill and just give a quick reference. Not only is New Hampshire considering this, our two neighboring states, Massachusetts and Vermont, have already distributed each $20 million worth of aid to farmers because of this past horrible growing season. Massachusetts successfully did this before the end of November to 347 farmers that applied for disaster aid. Vermont is still distributing funds, but currently has done this to over 280 farmers in its state at $20 million in aid. The reason I'm bringing that up as a reference is the agricultural community is very small. Everybody comes together. We had great resources within the state like Extension to help all of us understand how much of an impact this was. And the fact that everybody's looking at this makes you folks ask a couple questions. Why is this important? And why have other things not been there to help us? Well, in my role as New England Vegetable and Berry Growers President, I've sat at this same table in other states and with federal senators, Deputy Secretary, and Secretary Vilsack at the federal level in the Department of Ag talking about why crop insurance doesn't work for our small direct farming markets in New England and other things. And we're very fortunate in the Northeast to sell all of our products and goods, and we're in the growth sector of agriculture with small diversified farms serving their communities locally. So those national programs aren't really designed for our farmers or our producers in this area, and that's why some of this need is of importance. What I can tell you is from our farm, Brookdale and Hollis, we're one of the largest apple producers in the state. We usually harvest around 180,000 bushel of apples per year. This year we harvested less than 50,000, so less than a quarter of what we usually pick, and only a tenth of that was marketable. So 12,000 bushel is what I sold in the state. And in our family's history, which dates before the United States, where we were farming in Hollis, doing these same things, fruits and vegetables, we've never seen a devastation like this before. So if you're asking yourself why and why now, our region is very good at working at the state level and with the federal level and farmers in becoming resilient to climate change and stuff. Our farm in particular, we've done everything right, partnering with USDA Natural Resources, a lot of soil conservation, other things. And this freeze event and the excessive rain was so devastating that we saw some benefits from that, but there was nothing that could recover us from 53 inches of rain in the growing season. If you remember in September when there's thunderstorms coming through, we had 7.5 inches of rain at one point in less than 3 hours, and the peppers were literally floating off the plants down the field. So the need is there. I'm here in support of this bill, and thank you all for considering it. And you know, just the fact that our neighboring states have done similar things and how important this is for agriculture, I think you'll find that we're all a productive team here and very thankful for you all hearing our testimonies today.
Questions from the committee members? Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Trevor, thank you for coming in today. You touched briefly on crop insurance just a little bit. I think for the benefit of the committee, because this may be a discussion we have to have further as we look at this bill, can you, I know your farm does partake of crop insurance, at least on some of the crops you grow. Can you talk a little bit about how that program works and the deficiencies that you see in what you actually receive for a payment versus what you pay? And you don't have to get into specific numbers unless you want to, but.
Yeah, I have no problem. Senator Pearl, thank you. I'd talk about it in two crops, for instance, to cover fruits and vegetables. For our apple crop, the national insurance policy, which we've been advocating to develop, the price point is set at a national level. So, for instance, it's $12 a bushel is what the program would pay back at a full failure rate. Our number 1 and number 2 apples produced in the state of New Hampshire, number 1 is McIntosh, 2 is Gala, but it's closely followed by Honeycrisp, which is everybody's favorite. Our average bushel price for McIntosh sold either through wholesale or through direct market is anywhere between $36 to $40 a bushel. Gala, $38 to $42, and Honeycrisp around $70. So when you look at those costs and the stuff that's going into that, our crop loss on what we've done, we're usually around $7 million in apple production. We barely escaped less than 1 million, and our crop insurance that would be covering that because of how it works is going to be less than $1 million there. So my business in particular has a $5 million gap from one crop. We grow 200 different crops. So that's a loss there in apples, and we're one of the largest producers in the state. In that apple survey that UNH did, we're 48% of that apple loss just in that pie graph at one location. Sweet corn, I talk about that. The national policy, since sweet corn's grown all over the country, they consider a sweet corn ear marketable and relevant if it's 5.5 inches long. I won't need to get into the specifics of that, but everybody that grows sweet corn south of New Jersey or something like that, they have these little things called borers, and they eat the top of the corn. So all those folks down south and out west are used to chopping the top off of their sweet corn and peeling it, and you buy it at the grocery store different than you buy it up here. We all buy it with the husk, and we have to go home and peel it and make a mess, right? So if I brought a 5.5 inch ear of sweet corn to the grocery store, you'd all look at that and throw it in the trash. But they use that as the marketing standard. So we paid on our corporation this year around $9,000 for the federal corn insurance policy on sweet corn. We grow around 180 acres of sweet corn. We had 64% product loss and failure. When you have rain for consecutive days, a corn plant will grow and pollinate, but the anthers will not release the pollen if it's wet. So we literally grew a plant and it never pollinized itself because it continuously rained. Of that $9,000 insurance policy, which should have paid out anywhere around $200,000, $300,000. Because the federal government considers a 5.5-inch ear marketable, we didn't meet the threshold. I only received $3,000.
Great. Additional questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
NHFGA, Chuck Southey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Chuck Souther. With my wife Diane, we're farmers here in Concord, growing tree fruit, small fruit, and vegetables. I'm here today on behalf of the New Hampshire Fruit Growers Association, which represents roughly 70 or more of the commercial apple growers in the state. And yes, you've heard about the devastation that occurred. Many growers actually picked not one apple, and a few had a small crop, and it has been indicated when we passed the bill around, that was one of the first things that came up was the date of July 30th, because I will admit there was some optimism by some growers in early June that, well, I think we're going to end up with something here. This isn't as bad as we thought when the survey was done. The further the year went on, it was obvious that those apples were going to stay deformed. They weren't going to grow out of this. They had russeting on the fruit. And by the time we got to September harvest, those growers that had a few apples were really suffering. We support the bill, obviously. We had an issue with that date, and when we circulated the thing, the other issue that came up was Part C in Roman numeral 2. And there's some wording in there that just doesn't quite seem to make sense to us, so we don't understand what's going on with that. Having said that, you've got my written testimony about what happened. I would like to, Senator Rosenwald, you asked, have we ever done this before? I will say for tree, fruit, and vegetable growers, no, we have not. And part of that has been our extension service have been pushing us for years to diversify as a risk management tool. And most of us have done that. This year was like the perfect storm. On our farm, we lost our peaches in February, we lost our apples in May, and all of our vegetable crops rotted out in the field in July and August. So this is really unusual for us. We're not accustomed to doing this, but here we are. And I would also suggest, I think as Trevor indicated, yeah, $8 million is good. And what we're telling our members is that we hope we can get some money to them, hopefully in this spring as early as possible, to help with startup costs. Because if you're not aware, I just remind you, agriculture, we invest a ton of money in months before we ever get a chance to harvest a crop. So yeah, the spring is when we're spending money like nobody's business. And we're going into that spring with bank accounts that look really sad. So having said that, I'd be willing to answer any questions. We got somebody coming up from the vegetable growers. I'll let them expand on what happened in New Hampshire with vegetables.
Questions from the senators? All set. Thank you very much. Ray Breslin.
Ray Breslin, 3 Gary Drive. Now, look, I haven't personally been impacted. I'm just a private citizen. I'm from Londonderry, and we have a lot of apple orchards and other farms in the town of Londonderry. A lot of them are going away. But I just want to make a point that this is very important to support the farmers that are here in New Hampshire that are struggling to provide food. And any support that we can give them, we should seriously consider helping them out. So beyond that, I'm going to give other people a chance to speak.
The senators
Thank
have
you.
any questions of Ray?
Oh, go ahead.
Senator D'Alessandro does.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming. How much of Mac's orchards are left in Londonderry?
Virtually none. We have the the MAC. I'm sorry.
Yes,
The MAC.
yes, yeah.
No, a lot of that has been put in conservation. Some of it is being utilized. but like everybody else, they lost a lot of their crop. Some of it is in lowland, which that's completely lost. Some of it is in the higher elevation. They were able to save some of it. I can't tell you how much. But we had the Woodmont Orchard, which was 625 acres, that basically is all gone, all gone. And that's not because of a natural disaster. That's got to do with a development. But look, it's just one other point I want to make, and that is this. We're talking about New England, which is not ideal growing property. That's why a lot of it moved west, okay? But we have what we have, and we should take advantage of growing whatever crops we have and marketing them locally to help people out. So I just strongly want to say that we should support these farmers no matter what they're growing. Well, I'll take that back. But vegetables and other crops that are edible crops that and we can perhaps we can always do better. We can always do better. But we need to support these folks. They're struggling. They're doing a good thing. They're providing food. My thing personally is about the protection of fresh water, which affects anything that grows.
Okay, do any of the other senators have questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Ray.
Well, thank you for allowing me to speak.
Robert Johnson, followed by John Moulton, who was the last one I have on my list.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, Rob Johnson, representing the New Hampshire Farm Bureau as the Federation's policy director. And we are in strong support of the bill because of the catastrophic losses that our farmers experienced. And I'll just speak to two sections of the bill. Line 5, which has been alluded to before, we do ask the committee to change that July 30 to October 30 for the reasons that were spoken to. And then also in lines 29 and 30, also as mentioned earlier, we ask you to strike section 2, Roman 1C of the bill. The language is confusing, but probably more important to us at Farm Bureau, it's unfair. Whatever you do with this bill, we ask you to incentivize crop insurance. And we do have, there was less than 50%, from what I understand, of our growers that have it. It doesn't work for everybody, but for those who do take it out, you need to incentivize it. With that, I will close and just simply ask, if you are going to move forward, please expedite it, because our growers do need the funds that was mentioned earlier for planting this year. And thank you for your time and attention.
Questions for Mr. Johnson? Seeing none? Oh, Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. So, thank you for being here. Did you mean Roman 2? C?
Lines 29 and 30.
So,
Would be Roman 2C.
C, you don't
2C, yes.
think that other forms of reimbursement should be balanced out against grants that the state
Right.
might give?
Well, we're not clear what that language is, but if you need to, then I would make sure that that does not include those that have taken the initiative and paid for crop insurance. Again, you need to incentivize it.
Additional questions, Senator?
No.
Additional questions from the others? All right, thank you very much. And the last speaker on the list, John Moulton, Moulton Farm.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, senators, for taking the time to hear from us growers. I'm here representing Kyle Lacasse, who is the president of the New Hampshire Vegetable and Berry Growers. I'm representing Kyle because he's my farm manager and was unable to be here today. Almost everything within the letter that you received from Kyle has been highlighted this afternoon. I can add the personal message too, that at our farm in Meredith, we incurred all of the damage and all of the challenges that are outlined in all of the documents that you have. I looked around behind me when I came in, or shortly time ago, and I'm thinking, wow, I may be the most senior farmer here. And with that information in hand, I'm going to tell you that everything you are reading is absolutely correct, in that this has been the most difficult and devastating year that I've ever worked in or under. So those are the messages that I have, and I'm happy to take any
Thank you very
questions.
much.
Thank
Questions
you.
from the senators? Thank you. All set. Okay, in addition to those that have spoken, there were 5 people who signed in support, and there were 2 people online support, and there were 2 people who also signed in support on the sheet. And with that, we will close public hearing, and as soon as we're ready, we'll start the next public hearing.
I was hoping to be able to speak as another local farmer. I was fighting the storm getting here on time.
If the committee has no objection, then I will reopen the hearing and come on up and speak. I have a motion and a second to reopen the hearing. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Aye, opposed? Okay, your name is?
My name is Adam. I own Allison's
Adam.
Orchard. Adam Neck.
Neck?
N-A-E-C-K. I own and operate Allison's Orchard in Walpole, New Hampshire. It's about a 350-acre farm, mainly crops and peaches and apples, but we do grow vegetables and everything else that has been spoke about today. What I feel is important with this is I am probably the youngest farmer in this room. I am only 31 years of age, and to take on such a big farm, you know, I'm very proud to be able to do so. And what I have seen in this first year is, I mean, just unimaginable for all of us. And to be able to, well, not be able to even take a first year of what would be considered, I guess, a normal year has been extremely tough. I've done nothing but fight to figure out what is normal and get the train back on tracks. And it's just very tough. You know, this bill would be very beneficial to all of us farmers, but to consider myself a younger farmer and to trying to get more young farmers to step into this role, from what I've learned talking with other farmers, is that us young farmers are just disappearing. These farms are just disappearing, and you know, if I was to talk to other young farmers, I mean, I think my story would be extremely discouraging to somebody in my age trying to step into a position that I have done. It just is very tough. It's also very, I guess, disappointing with what I've had to go through to get what little support we have had. You know, it's just, you know, the things I've learned so far to the way things have actually turned out are totally different. I mean, when this big thing happened, Jeremy from UNH reached out and he started going and was like, okay, well, how to report this? How do we get the state in on this? Where do we go from this? And everybody was like, call the USDA's office, maybe. Let's start there. And I feel like this bill will just help open the eyes to other avenues of resources in the future, again, for younger farmers and just the farmers that still plan to be around a while. I think it'd be very important to just take a step back and look at everything on the agricultural side. It is the backbone of America. You need us no matter what, and we want to be here to feed everyone. And an orchard like mine is all about getting the families out and enjoying their time as well too. So we'd like to continue that moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else? We'll close the public hearing again. Okay, next one up is Senate Bill 494. As, if you pass that down to okay. We're about to do Senate Bill 494. We have the prime sponsor here to introduce himself and the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, and good morning, or good afternoon, I should say. It's been a long day. I am Senator Donovan Fenton. I represent District 10. I'm here to introduce Senate Bill 494, which would create a farmer relief fund. My district was hit hard this past year. We had a late frost that decimated crops, especially our apple orchards, as you just heard. A low of 25 degrees was recorded in Concord, tying the record for the coldest May 18th ever. Temperatures that dipped to negative 20 in February decimated our peach crop. This caused some apple orchards and peach crops across the state to lose 100% of their crops. We then also had torrential rains, as you heard. This summer was the wettest on record for New Hampshire. The state got more than 21 inches of rain in June, July, and August, about 8 inches more than average. And that in turn caused unprecedented floods. New Hampshire had more flash flood warnings in July than any full year on record. Communities from the White Mountains, Lakes regions, Monadnock region, and seemingly everywhere in between were hit over and over again by storms with torrential rains and flooding that caused millions in damages. New Hampshire weather in 23 was marked by extraordinary flash flooding, a tornado touchdown, huge fluctuations in temperatures, and massive amounts of rain. Now imagine what that did to our farmers, as I'm sure you've already heard. And I'll tell you a little bit. $10 million in damages to the state's fruit crop this year and $3 million in damage to the vegetable crop. These figures don't take into account the financial loss farmers had who weren't able to sell associated products because the damage prevented customers from visiting. Think about the orchards who rely on tourism. People from all over the world come to New Hampshire in the fall to pick apples. We have our local farmers markets and farmer stands that we visit. We pride ourselves in buying locally grown food. When our farmers called me and asked me what I can do as a state to help them, I was really surprised there really wasn't a lot of options. The only options for them was farm insurance, which could help cover losses, but many farmers don't have it because of how expensive it is, or they're extremely underinsured. There's also some federal programs that provide low-interest loans for crop damage, but don't have direct support. Currently, New Hampshire doesn't offer any direct assistance. Members of the committee, what we experienced last summer was not a one-time thing. We're going to continuously see extreme weather events, and our farmers will be the ones impacted the most. We will lose agribusiness, tourism, small businesses, and generational businesses. We need to be preemptive and help our farmers before this next growing season. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the senators? Okay, thank you very
You
much.
let me off the hook easy. I appreciate it.
Hey,
I'm going to zip back to committee.
Jeremy and Sarah, you guys want to come up again separately or together? And remember that we just heard the other bill, so if there is repeating stuff, you don't need to repeat it. You can reference it or just allude to it.
We need you to run Amtrak. Keep it on time.
I'm way behind time right now, so.
All right, thank you for hearing me again. I had the opportunity to meet with Senator Fenton and Teresa and her husband at Pete's Stand about 3 weeks ago, and we had a good conversation with them there, basically about many of the things that you have heard here today, some of the effects that we're seeing from changing weather. What I did want to bring to the attention of everyone here today in the hopes of clarifying this conversation as far as what are we talking about when we're talking about changing weather when it comes to agriculture. A few of those things are longer growing seasons and plant hardiness zone shifts. So there could be challenges and potentially opportunities in the future related to that. We'll have to think about how are we going to potentially respond to these shifts. And so with each of these new occurrences, we're going to have to think about strategies. And so, part of our strategy associated with that when we're discussing a fund like this is, potentially there would be the opportunity for growers to think innovatively about changing practices, which many of them are already doing in partnership with NRCS through USDA funding. But this would be, I think, a real nod from New Hampshire to say, yes, we recognize that this is happening. This is something our growers are faced with. And we also want to support innovative strategies for them to move forward, to address these issues, and be better prepared the next time that some of these disasters come around. Additionally, we're seeing things like these early warm-ups and increased frost freeze risk. We've heard all about that today. More frequent intense heat waves, more frequent intense downpours, longer droughts and dry spells. So all of these things our farmers are going to be faced with going forward. This is predicted to continue. Our state climatologist, Mary Stampone, just recently released a large report on this and what we can expect to see here in the Northeast related to changing climate. So I'll leave it at that and let Sarah take the rest.
So I think, Jeremy summarized quite a bit what we're, focusing with farmers on moving forward and what we're expecting in the future. A part of, I know y'all all have access to the surveys that we did. There were also quite a few farmers that couldn't be here today to talk about all of the bills that are going through because of the weather or because they just couldn't get off the farm. So their testimonies are also in that packet. And part of what you'll see on there is, one example is Holly Gowdy, wrote in and she's talked about between the constant back and forth of years between droughts and then excessive flooding. It's hard to sometimes prepare yourself whenever you don't know what that next year is going to look like. And one of the other things, like I said, I wanted to just make sure that everybody's aware of is that a lot of these farms are farming on areas that are uninsurable. A lot of them are, flood protection zones, because oftentimes our farms are farming in areas where we can't build houses. We farm where we can. And it's also sometimes the best land for crops to grow when we don't have these excessive floods. So just as you're, thinking about these bills, have that in your mind of consideration as to why these farms are farming in some of these areas that may not make sense unless you're a farmer.
Questions from the senators? Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for coming in today. So you talked about crop insurance just a little bit. I just want to, in your travels around the state, and I know, Jeremy, you mostly work in the county, but you both kind of cover and talk to a lot of farms. Are you seeing that many people are feeling like they're benefiting well from crop insurance, or is it just something that they're trying to use in certain cases to mitigate, the risk of a year like this?
I guess I'll answer part of that. So for crop insurance specifically, I don't know many farms that have crop insurance. Many farms had it in the past, but from what I have heard, and I know the survey kind of goes through some of those responses, even when they get relief and they get payouts, it is not often at all that they get enough to cover the premium. So most of the farms that I work with do not use crop insurance. They do, however, use milk revenue protection insurance, and most farms are pretty happy with, especially the changes that have been made through that. So they are protected on some front, but that doesn't cover, declining quality and extreme disasters. That's looking at specifically at milk price, since they can't regulate that. That's regulated for them, and feed prices. So.
And I would just add that, so with our crop surveys, we did ask that question. And so for fruit producers, it was almost right down the middle, half and half. Half of them had crop insurance, half did not. I think you've heard others speak to kind of why that is, as far as fit of the programs and them fitting the way that we grow and market apples in New Hampshire. With the vegetable side of things, it was much, much less. And I really think that's indicative of the fact, again, that those programs aren't necessarily designed for producers here in New Hampshire. Record keeping associated with those can be an issue and a hurdle that growers have to overcome. And I think that there is also room for education and improvement of those programs as far as fit for those programs and helping growers understand how they may be able to better utilize them. I will say that the conversation around crop insurance this year has been active, and I think a lot of growers recognize that that's something that is out there that may potentially be helpful, but that there are improvements that need to be made to many of those programs to have them feel like that's a valuable investment for them to make.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ray Breslin. I don't know whether he stayed or not. I don't see him. Mr. Breslin? Okay. And then our last speaker, Robert Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, Rob Johnson representing Farm Bureau. And we're supportive of the bill, but we want to make clear that our priority is the previous bill and taking care of what happened as opposed to this. We'd ask the committee to consider establishing the fund if possible. And in closing, again, if you establish the fund, we do think the language itself, there aren't any sideboards there, and you might consider tying any assistance to it being required that there be a federally declared disaster area by the federal government. There's already a process for that, and again, it would provide some sideboards and make it easier to administer. Thank you.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much. In addition to the people who have spoken, there were 2 additional people who signed in support on the sheet here, and there were also 7 people who signed in support online. Anyone else? I'll close this public hearing, and we'll open the public hearing on the next bill in just a minute. 396. Senator Carson, come on up. Okay, we're about to have the hearing on Senate Bill 396, and Prime Sponsor is here, so I'll ask her to introduce herself and the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to members of Senate Finance. For the record, my name is Sharon Carson, and I have the pleasure of representing Senate District 14, comprising the towns of Auburn, Londonderry, and Hudson. And I have this afternoon for your consideration Senate Bill, let me get this out here, 396 FNA, relative to making an appropriation to the Culinary Arts Program at the Wilbur H. Palmer Regional Career and Technical Education Center. Mr. Chairman, as you probably remember, a few years ago, we were able to get the technical center the money that they needed to finish the whole project. And I really appreciated everybody's support on doing that. But they've run into another problem that is not of their own making. There was money left over from their budget, and they decided, well, let's see if we can get these new range hoods, industrial-sized range hoods for their culinary arts programs. And they had contacted the Department of Education, and the Department of Education told them not only once but twice, yes, you can use the money to buy these hoods. They went ahead and bought them, and then the state clawed back the money. So now they are stuck between a rock and a hard place in that they've already bought these hoods, they're in place, they're being used, but they don't have the money to pay for them. The only way they will be by raising their taxes on the municipality. I strongly believe that is wrong. They were given permission by the Education Commissioner wrongly to do this, and they really should be made whole. This appropriates $672,672.99, which was the cost of the hoods. And it will enable the Palmer Career and Technical Education Center to repair and replace the ventilation and exhaust systems in the Culinary Arts Program's teaching kitchen. They will provide a learning space for students to prepare for careers in the hospitality and restaurant industry, an important sector of the economy both for the region and for Granite State. In its present state, students can observe a teacher demonstrating but not practice essential skills. This appropriation will allow them to become skilled and knowledgeable with good-paying jobs, contributing to the health of the economy. And because these funds present a significant change to what was approved for funding by the legislature initially, the New Hampshire Department of Education believes that the appropriating the use of these funds for this purpose must be the decision of the legislature. I was hoping that someone from the department would be here to speak to this issue, but I had been contacted by the commissioner who explained exactly what had happened. In my conversations with him, he accepted responsibility for the miscommunication, and I strongly believe that my constituents in the town of Hudson should not have to bear the responsibility of the cost, because the mistake was made by the Department of Education in giving the go-ahead. So I hope that we can address this issue and make the town of Hudson whole on this particular issue while providing the best educational opportunities for their students at the technical center. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I will try to answer any questions that you might have.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. Did you have discussions with the Department of Education about them finding this money within their current biennial budget?
No, thank you for the question. No, I did not. They did not speak about finding the money in their budget. We had talked about the capital budget because that's originally where the money came from to build the center. But there was no discussion about this money coming from the Department of Education. And that's why I said I hope someone is here today from the department that can address that issue.
There is somebody from the department behind you. Okay, additional questions? Senator Burton.
You know what, I'll wait till the department comes out.
Okay. I have a question. Does the number that you're giving us take into consideration the split that we do on all of the CTE money? And I'm seeing somebody shake his head, yes back there.
Okay.
So we'll get.
Answers the question. This was the number that I was given, Mr. Chairman, so this is the number that I'm advocating for.
Again, I just want to make sure that, because there's normally a split, and I want to make sure that that is being. Additional questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And we will ask the representative from the Ed Department to come on up. Jeff Beard?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. I'm Dr. Jeff Beard. I'm the State Director for Career and Technical Education with the Department of Education. And thank you, Senator Carson, for introducing this bill, which the department does support. I wanted to offer a couple points of clarification, and then, of course, I'm available for any and all questions. The department has an opportunity to bring forward unspent funds, as you all know. In this case, at the time that we had that opportunity, we were unaware of this teaching kitchen issue. And so we believed that the project at the Palmer Center was complete. So the Hudson School District had done a great job of managing, using funds wisely and well, did have some unspent funds that the department could have brought forward. And I think where the miscommunication or misunderstanding may have taken place is there's a difference in our mind on a technical level between allowability and, of course, appropriation. And appropriations come through, as you all well know, through the legislature and then the governor. And so when the question was asked, is this allowable? The answer is yes. Doing repair work for a teaching kitchen, putting in a new HVAC system in these range hoods, which are necessary to make the teaching kitchen fully functioning, that is allowable. At that point, the decision of the department was that this was a project or an amount that was outside of the scope of the project that had initially been approved. And so that was really, again, shades of gray, but that was the determination that had been made. So again, as we discovered that this was a need, we do support it. The question was asked earlier if this was part of that up to 75% state-funded versus 25% locally funded for career technical education renovation projects. And yes, it is. The full amount of the range hood installation and HVAC system repair was in the area of $900,000. So this $670,000 and change that's in this appropriations bill is the state amount that we would have covered, that 75%.
Questions? Senator Herzl.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. So in this amount, could the legislature, instead of assigning another $675,000, could we approve the money that was spent for the pieces of equipment?
I really can't speak to that, Senator. I don't know in terms of rules or statutes that would support that or procedures. So unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that.
Senator Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the previous testimony indicated that there was a clawback. So if we claw back the money, then we could reappropriate the money, because we took back $600,000 that was obviously inappropriately assigned. So where did the clawback come from? Who initiated the clawback and found that there was a discrepancy in where the money could have and should have been spent?
Thank you, Senator. At the end of every fiscal year, or quarterly rather, the department reports on expenditures related to capital budget. In this case, we had the opportunity to bring these funds forward, and we at that point decided not to bring them forward. This would have been in December of, I believe, 2023, last December. And the reason we had made that determination is that we were aware of this teaching kitchen issue, but did not know that this work was going to be done. So the work was outside of the scope of what had originally been approved for this project. This was an additional cost.
Okay, I'm going to ask LBA to get with you guys and figure out how much money was unspent. That would have been a HB 25 issue, that the money was authorized but not authorized for this part of the project, and then get back to us for our next meeting. Senator Alessandro.
Just a point of information, Mr. Chairman. There was a supplemental appropriation that we did to make this thing whole. We found more money so that this project could be done. Do you remember that? We worked very hard to do that. I know I initiated that movement to take care of Senator Carson and to get this complete. Now, it seems to me, with all of that effort, with all of that work, we find out that now $600,000 has been clawed back from an appropriation that we gave. It doesn't make sense to me.
And that's why I want LBA to investigate it, put together, and give us a report on options that we might be able to take without taking this out of general funds.
Well, fiscal committee could have looked at this because according to your testimony, it's a year ago that this was found out. So there was ample time to address this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any additional questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our final speaker is Dan, I'm going to say Mullis, Hudson School District.
Thank you, Senators, for having me here today. I wanted to express my support of this legislative bill, and first would like to thank Senator Carson for sponsoring this legislative bill and co-sponsors Senator Waters and Senator Ennis for their support, and the Hudson delegation for their support of this bill for the Wilbur Palmer CTE Center at Alvin High School. This legislation supports an update to the ventilation system, as mentioned by Senator Carson and Mr. Beard from the Department of Education, for a culinary arts teaching classroom and program for students in the to advance the culinary skills for our students. This ventilation supports cooking, which includes grease cooking, which is that more advanced cooking that occurs both in Culinary Arts 1, Culinary Arts 2, which is an honors level course, and Culinary Arts 3, which requires these specialized ventilation hoods. This work was completed this summer by LaValle Brenzinger Architects and Harvey Construction. And as mentioned, the reimbursement costs of $672,672.99 is the reimbursement for these construction expenses. Again, I would like to thank the senators and legislators for their support of this bill, and can certainly try to answer any questions that the senators may have.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much. That's the last person I had that asked to speak. There were 3 additional people who signed up online in support. Is there anyone out there that needs to speak that didn't sign up? Seeing none, we'll close that public hearing and we'll open the next one, Senate Bill 398, in just a minute. We don't have the prime.
They're coming from across the street. I know, I just came from that.
All right, so since we don't know when the prime sponsor, I understand, but I don't know when she's going to get here, and we will let her introduce the bill. But before that, Catherine Heck is the next one on my list. Oh, there she is. Just as Senator, you may introduce your bill.
Thank you. Please give me a moment to get my glasses out, or I won't be able to read a thing. Well, good afternoon. For the record, I'm Denise Ricciardi, the state senator for District 9, encompassing 13 towns from Bedford all the way to Hinsdale. Outside of Meals and Rooms revenue sharing, the additional highway block grant funds received in 2018, 2022, and 2023 have been extremely effective as directed form of local property tax relief with tangible results, while also stimulating the New Hampshire economy. The highway block grant is based on the road toll, where all municipalities get a share based on miles of class 4 and 5 road and local population. Going back to 2011, the block grant for roads has been at approximately $35 million, and some years even lower. This amount is not keeping up with inflation. While the legislature continues to study the highway fund, the gas tax, and electric vehicles, like the bill last year that passed to charge electric vehicles a registration fee, to find solutions, we can partner with cities and towns now if we have available state surplus to move forward local transportation plans. 12 years ago, a mile of road was $500,000 to repair. In 2018, it was up to $1 million. Today, the cost can be upwards of $1.25 million to replace that same mile of road. And the block grant is not adjusting for this inflationary pressure, even with the measures to address electrical vehicles not contributing to gas consumption. The costs for new road construction are even higher, and with the pressure to provide more housing, the only way to fund new local road projects is through additional local taxation. Local road maintenance and construction is an investment in our communities and aids in our robust travel and tourism industry, where we need well-maintained roads and bridges for residents and visitors alike. This bill also stimulates the economy by providing jobs in all areas of roads and bridge construction. Infrastructure investments have a compounding economic impact as engineers, skilled workers, and equipment are necessary to move the projects forward. Every dollar we spend on infrastructure increases the New Hampshire GDP. It adds to the economy and creates jobs. It is important to note that this bill also considers bridges and culverts. In looking at the severe rain experience this past summer, the culvert repair and maintenance is critical to help avoid road washouts and to keep stormwater from polluting drinking water sources. A bridge project can be in the millions, and for some of the smaller towns, one bridge project is more than their annual operating budget. These dollars really are making a difference we can all experience when we travel across the state, as we all travel and use our state and local road system. This bill is requesting $40 million in surplus to continue this funding, as every dollar sent back to cities and towns is a dollar that is not raised locally in property tax bill and invested directly back in New Hampshire. It is targeted funding, and this funding formula provides every city and town dollars on a non-competitive basis, so every local property taxpayer experiences relief. These dollars can only be spent on the road, culvert, and bridge-related costs. And when combined with block grant, it is still $6 million less. That was sent back to the cities and towns in the last biennium, with all road and bridge funding considered. This bill is a tangible investment infrastructure. It's an investment in the workforce, in our economy, and it provides property tax relief statewide. Thank you for listening to my testimony.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you.
Ms. Heck.
Good afternoon, Chairman Gray, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Catherine Heck from the New Hampshire Municipal Association, and we are here in strong support of this legislation, should there be state surplus to consider. Thank you to Senator Ricciardi for bringing this forward, and thank you to Senator Bradley for Senate Bill 401 a few years ago, and Senator D'Alessandro for SB 270, which was included in House Bill 2. Senator Ricciardi really did a comprehensive job of outlining the concerns that we've been experiencing with the highway block grant, as in 2011, $34.8 million was redistributed back, and in 2022, it was $34.7 million. So less, more than a decade later. And we do recognize the legislature is working very hard to address this, but these dollars really have made a difference. One of my communities, when I reached out to say this bill was coming back forward, they have a highway budget for their road repair and maintenance of $550,000, and they need an increase of $100,000 in 2024 just to do the same amount of work that they did in 2023. So that this makes a difference. Portsmouth was going to come and testify today, but their public works director is dealing with a flooding issue, so this is kind of directly related to that. So I think you'll be seeing some written testimony from the city of Portsmouth. And the town of Conway said that they are working on a $600,000 bridge project with the bridge money that they received in House Bill 2. That's allowing them to combine with their capital reserve to move that project forward much sooner. Otherwise, they were going to have to save those dollars over time. A few things that weren't touched upon. Well, it's important to note it is a formula grant, so our towns don't compete with the money, and everybody does get a share. For the dollar for dollar decrease, has certainly resulted in significant property tax increases for our residents in order to keep up our transportation plans. Like you have a 10-year road plan, our cities and towns have a 6 to 10-year road plan as well. So I would like to note that Senator Ricciardi touched on the multiplier effect, which is something I hadn't considered in the past, but I do know anecdotally that every dollar invested into infrastructure projects directly, because they're tangible, they require physical goods, services, and employment, will equal about $1 $1.10 to $1.25 back, directly back into the New Hampshire economy. So I do think that is of note. The other interesting thing is that we do have unprecedented federal funds available. However, they're all on a competitive basis. These dollars do allow cities and towns to use the additional funds, one-time payments, to access those federal dollars, because we need 20 to 30% of what we receive federally in a match, and we have to prove before we receive grant dollars that we have the funds available, which automatically prohibits some of our towns from even applying for these grant dollars. So I do believe these funds really move us forward should the surplus be available in any amount, and there really is evidence from the last two payments in the last 2 years that this has not only allowed towns to keep up with their plans, but even move forward some of the plans they hadn't considered. And one final note is addressing culverts. Is last week we heard about cyanobacteria and bringing the cyanobacteria loan fund. We do know that road wash-off and runoff contribute to the cyanobacteria growing in our lakes. So again, having additional dollars to address this is certainly helpful and might even help mitigate some of the other unintended consequences. So that concludes my testimony, and I thank you for your time if you have any questions.
Questions from the senators? Seeing
Thank you.
none, thank you very much. Alex from ALEC. It says ALEC.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Alex Katrubis. I'm here representing the engineering industry, American Council of Engineering Companies of New Hampshire.
Looks like an L.
Sorry, I have bad handwriting. We are here today to support this legislation because there's clearly a continued need for this type of funding at the local level. As you heard, the legislature has passed several of these bills in recent years, and we've lowered the number of red-listed municipal bridges from 373 at the end of 2004 to 210 at the end of 2022. Also, as you heard, the program is really critical to the smaller communities. For example, the town of Richmond in Cheshire County, they only have about 1,200 residents, but they've utilized this program in 2022 to help fund 2 bridges in their community that had been deemed unsafe and needed to be repaired. One of the bridges was more than 70 years old. Another has culverts that are at risk of collapsing. So communities like Richmond, obviously they have limited levers to pull in terms of raising dollars. They really have property taxes and maybe registration fees. So without this program, as you've heard, they would have to rely on property tax increases to fund these type of projects. I do want to say a brief note about inflation. I did hand out some information. The DOT had a meeting with the engineering community back in October, and we heard specific to these type of locally managed projects, so largely funding from the state, going back to the municipalities. And in terms of, number of bidders for construction, so the number of contractors who would bid on a project, in 2020, there were an average of 3.6 bidders for every project that was put out under this program. In 2023, it dropped to 1.8 per project. So it went from 3.6 to 1.8 over 3 years. And then if you look at the dollar amounts, there's an annual increase in the project cost based on the bids and the preparation of plans, specifications of the estimate. So if you look at since 2020, the low bid is actually coming in almost 13%, 12.8% higher than what the DOT is anticipating these projects will cost, and the municipalities are anticipating the projects will cost. In 2020, they were coming in 6% over average, 21, 8% over average, 22, 21%, and 23, 26% higher. So based on, as I said, the need out there in the communities, how critical this program has been to particularly the smaller communities, and these inflationary issues that the municipalities are facing, we think it makes sense to adopt this if you're able to find the dollars to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very
You're welcome.
much. Our last speaker, NHDOT, Kathleen, and I'm going to let you.
I'll say.
All right. I could try, but.
Good afternoon.
Kathy Mulcahy Hampson, I'm the Senior Hearings Examiner and the unofficial legislative liaison for the Department of Transportation. It's great to see you all in the new year. Similar to prior recent funding bills passed by the legislature to help municipalities, the department understands that Senate Bill 398 is funded with general funds, and DOT would act as a pass-through to distribute the funds to the municipalities, which we have a system in place to do already with the block grant aid. The department stands ready and able to distribute the funds. I'd like to express the department's appreciation for these continuing legislative efforts to help the municipalities fund improvements for transportation safety and efficiency throughout our great state. We support the bill. The only issue was the effective date, and the dates referenced in the bill should be FY 2025. I think it's line 3, June 30th, 2023, and line 20, June 30th, 2024. That should be, I think, the funds wouldn't be there.
There is also an amendment, but the dates don't go out that far. I would request that you contact Senator Bishardi and talk that over with her.
Absolutely.
Additional questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That is the last person who has signed up to speak. There were 5 people in support and 1 opposed who signed up online. And with nobody else wanting to speak, I will close the vote. Oh.
I have a question
Okay.
for the LBA. So
why don't we do that in executive session? Senator?
Okay, fine.
That would be preferred. All right, so I'm going to close the public hearing and ask for a motion to go into executive session. Senator Ennis, seconded by Senator Birdsell. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, we are in executive session. Your question, Senator.
Thank you. So I'm trying to recollect in my memory, I think it was 2022, in Senate Bill 401, we appropriated an additional $66 million for this program, roads and bridges. I think it was 30 and 36, as I recall.
Yeah, it was,
in House Bill 2 in 2023, it was Senator Dee's bill, I think $20 million. What in past budgets, if you can remember, have we appropriated for this initiative?
as far as above and beyond what the statutory block grant.
Above and beyond the statute.
Well, I can't recall. I'd have to look to see if we've done any specials specific to these programs.
I don't remember any. I'm just curious.
You'll have time then to look it up. Okay. Again, I do like when you talk about the bills to be in executive session, so we're here. I don't anticipate that we are going to act on any bills today, but is there any bill that you do want to discuss? Seeing none? Oh. Senator Bradley.
Yeah, so in terms of the 2 farm relief bills, I believe that the governor is going to have a request of fiscal for ARPA money to substitute for some portion of that. If it is the case, I'm trying to accelerate it to Friday's fiscal meeting. We'll see what happens.
All right.
Fiscal. Mr. Chairman.
I saw Senator Rosenwald's hand first. So.
Well, thank you. Is it going to be possible for fiscal to find out of the ARPA funds that have been appropriated and maybe encumbered what percentage has actually been spent and what will not be spent. Because we're going to run up against the commitment deadline in September and then the spending deadline 2 years later. So the legislature, who has the constitutional authority to appropriate funds, hasn't really gotten into what seems like a very cloudy and obscure process. And I'm just wondering if you can work your magic to give fiscal the information on what might be available for ARPA funds, because just today, we're sitting here hearing $54 almost million of requests. They all seem to have value, but we don't want to be in the position of turning back federal funds. And perhaps the legislature could be more assertive. And
I will ask.
Senator D'Alessandro, you were the next one with a question.
Thank you, yeah. I guess, let me just give an appendage to Senator Rosenwald's query. The time has come when we should know, we as a legislature should know what's left of the ARPA funds, what's left of the COVID money. Because it's in the best interest of the state that we appropriately spend that money. And as Senator has pointed out, we've had $53 million worth of requests today, that many of which might be able to be addressed if there is money left from ARPA. But we have inquired over and over and over again at fiscal, and Senator Bradley, you're there, so you know what I'm saying is truism. How much is left, and how can we find out how much is left? Now, we got almost $1 billion, and it seems to me somebody should be accounting for that money. We should know how much money is left, because look at what we're getting this week at fiscal in terms of the transfers, the amount of money that we're transferring at this point in time. So I would just re-emphasize the point that, you know, we've done a good job with the budget. Kudos to the Senate President. And we tried to give everybody, indeed, what they were asking for, which is really something. Probably we spent more money in this last budget than we've spent in a long time. And I've been here 50 years. That's the biggest budget that I've ever been part of. And it seems to me, if we don't know how much is left from the money that was obligated to us by the federal government, and we're looking at ask for $53 million, which we can't satisfy. I mean, we cannot satisfy. There's just not enough money to do that. If we don't have the information, then we're shooting in the dark, and I don't like that, and I don't think anybody else does.
I don't disagree. Obviously, the situation with the Sununu Youth Center and the litigation is going to be a dominant issue for the rest of this session, and how we deal with all the appropriation requests. There are a huge number of them. They all probably have merit. But I think, as the two of you know, and I've talked to a number of people, that surplus is likely to be necessary for the settlements. So.
Senator Bertzel.
Who actually is holding the purse strings on the ARPA funds?
So the governor's budget director and the governor make requests of fiscal, and fiscal approves.
Okay.
Or not.
Okay, different subject. One part of the Farm Bill that kind of surprised me is that we are planting in areas that are prone to problems. Yes. Okay, it's like, you know, certain residences where there's flooding every year, and, you know, insurance can, the amount of the fee that you pay for your insurance can certainly be commensurate with the risk. And whatever we do with the farm bill, if there's not a provision in there for these high-risk areas being treated at least a little bit differently than, upland somewhere, that, may need to be considered, so.
If I can respond to that a little bit.
Yep.
I think what you're seeing is these are high-risk flood areas typically in the spring when they're not planted. These aren't high-risk flood areas during the summer normally, but since we had exceptionally high water levels through the high increase in, in rain that occurred, that honestly, we were seeing spring-like issues in August,
So
even on my own land.
So you're saying in those particular areas, it may be a crop that has a shorter growing season and you wait until the land dries?
Typically, they're field corn, and they aren't planted until the spring flooding goes down, and it's not a problem again, normally. We just had, record levels of rainfall, and we saw spring-like conditions in August. I had land on the hilltops that you couldn't get on, running water right out of the hills, and just, I made more of a mess this year in my fields than I ever have.
Senator Ennis.
I was just going to add to that. I mean, there's about 25 acres at our place that we couldn't get into hay this year, couldn't put animals on it because it was so soft through the summer. Year prior, it was only soft during the melt.
Mhm.
After that, it clears up. So it's an issue.
Senator Rosenwald.
How confident are we that this was a one-off?
I can only tell you this. I've done this for more than 40 years of my life and never seen anything like it. We've seen wet years. We've seen times where you get a lot of rain, but you don't have months of rain continuous. This excessive moisture has gone on since June 3rd. I can tell you 6 p.m. June 3rd it started. I can tell you almost exactly to the minute because it came, and it just has not stopped. We needed it that day. We did need it that day, but we didn't need it for the ensuing 6 months afterwards where it just continued. So I don't know what next year's going to look like, Senator. A friend of mine in the ag industry said this is the 29th consecutive non-average year of that he's done this, and there's some truth to that. But we don't see this is way out of norm, and all I can say is if this becomes our norm, you don't have money enough in the state to save agriculture if that's the case. But that's not what we anticipate. We anticipate this is just an abnormal year, and you've got many farms that are teetering on the edge because, as you heard from these folks, they're getting ready to go into their next year's purchases, and they don't have the money from last year's in the coffers to do it. That's why we need to expedite this and act very quickly, or we've got farms that just may go, you know what, I just don't have it to do it.
Additional comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll take a motion to come out of executive session.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second to come out of executive session. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Our business of the day being complete, we are adjourned. And Grant, if you'd go push the button.